Today, September 15, Russia has further escalated by starting a new conflict with NATO countries. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk stated that half an hour ago a drone targeting a government building in the center of Warsaw was shot down. The downed drone was actually flying over the Polish president's residence. And this is despite the fact that literally today, the head of the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Radosław Sikorski, assured that Poland had achieved 100% effectiveness in detecting and neutralizing drones if measured by Ukrainian standards. The previous day, Russian drones had already entered Romania. But for some reason, NATO is in no hurry to strike back at Russia, although in Poland, they are already proposing to shoot down aerial targets over Ukraine and even send NATO fighter jets into Ukrainian airspace. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today, September 15th, let's look at the latest incident that just recently happened. It's the downed drone over the center of Warsaw. And we'll also discuss how people in Poland are reacting to all of this and what the Poles are proposing to protect both their own skies and Ukraine's skies. But before we begin, let me remind you that every day on this YouTube channel, several news and analytical stories about events around the world are released, so that you can stay up to date with absolutely all the news. That's why I recommend subscribing to this YouTube channel, and please hit the like button under this video. So, on the evening of September 15, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk officially announced that a drone, which was flying over government buildings and the presidential residence, had been neutralized in Poland. According to Tusk, the Polish State Protection Service on Monday neutralized a drone that was flying over government buildings on Parkowa Street and Dworcowa. Dom Belvedere is a residence of the Polish president. Moving on. Tusk, without giving details, stated that, quote, 2 Belarusian citizens have been detained and the police are investigating the circumstances of the incident. So, does that mean some kind of drone was already flying over the center of Warsaw? At the same time, military, let me emphasize offensive, exercises by Russians and Belarusians called Zapad 2025 are being held in Belarus. Let me remind you, the incident became known after nearly 24 Russian drones violated Polish airspace last week, having flown in from Ukrainian territory, and notably Belarus. But the paradox is that the drone was shot down over the center of the Polish capital, while the Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski literally stated this afternoon that there was an incursion of Russian drones into the country's airspace. NATO was an attempt by the Kremlin to test the reaction of the North Atlantic Alliance through gradual escalation without provoking a full-scale response. Here is your gradual escalation. First they crossed the border and now there are some drones over Warsaw. Sikorski confirmed that the drones that entered Polish airspace were capable of carrying munitions but were not equipped with explosives. Interestingly, all of them turned out to be empty, which, in my opinion, suggests that Russia was trying to test us without starting a war. Moreover, Minister Sikorski rejected the suggestion that the Polish air defense system was unprepared for such developments. Considering that some of the drones flew hundreds of kilometers over Polish territory, and according to available data, out of about 19 unmanned aerial vehicles, only 3 or 4 were shot down. But Sikorski comments on this result as follows. The drones did not reach their targets, property damage was minimal, and no one was hurt. If this had happened in Ukraine, by Ukrainian standards, it would have been considered a complete success. Our response would have been much tougher if the attack had resulted in casualties or injuries on Polish territory. But now Polish groups need to undergo drone countermeasure training with Ukrainian operators to better defend against attacks. Ukrainians have the best equipment for countering Russian drones, and they have much greater and more recent experience in confronting the Russian army. Well, although it's worth noting that Sikorski himself said today that the West should consider shooting down Russian drones and missiles in Ukrainian airspace. I should note that the head of Poland's diplomatic department said this against the backdrop of discussions about Russian drones entering Polish airspace. Here's his quote. "If you ask me personally, we should think about it. Technically, we as NATO and the European Union would be able to do it, but this is a decision that Poland cannot make on its own, only together with all its allies. He also suggested creating a coordinated approach against the Russian shadow fleet in the Baltic Sea. Quote, Germany or NATO could create a maritime control zone in the North Sea and thus control the entry of these ships into the Baltic Sea. Also today, the newspaper Le Monde writes that after the Russian provocation with drones in Polish airspace, NATO countries should reconsider their approach to deterring Russia and still be responsible for protecting the airspace. Well, at least over the western regions of Ukraine, a group of Western military experts and representatives of civil society wrote about this in an article titled Appeal on the pages of the French newspaper Le Monde. They note that the incident on the night of September 10 was not an accident, since Russia had obviously prepared for it in advance. Since the use of these drones was tested back in the summer, Lithuanian and Polish SIM cards were used in these drones. And now I'll quote from this statement. Moscow programs its drones to connect to European telecommunications networks, turning each drone into an information sensor, to identify defensive objects and active radar stations, and to analyze the protocols and response times of European air defense forces. In this new reality, Europe can no longer rely on a passive defense strategy, which consists of simply shooting down UAVs over its own territory, and must focus its defense further upstream. To start intercepting Russian missiles and drones in Ukrainian airspace, protecting both themselves and the civilian population of Ukraine. And now the authors of the initiative have already calculated that to close the skies over the western part of Ukraine, 120 NATO fighter jets would be enough. Meanwhile, their risk would be low because of Russian air defense and intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance systems. Reach Western Ukraine. Here's another quote. Protecting the western territory of Ukraine will allow the Ukrainian armed forces to focus on the eastern front, help ensure the security of the country's economy and its nuclear safety. This refers to both Poland and Ukraine, and will also boost the morale of the population and contribute to the growth of defense production in Ukraine. And in this scenario, Russia will be more inclined to negotiate a ceasefire. Well, let's see what the reaction will be to the fact that a drone has already flown right into Warsaw, flew over government buildings. What kind of drone was it? Obviously, this is yet another provocation. But let's see what the reaction will be after this, regarding how ready they really are to strengthen their own security. Or will they once again pretend that nothing happened? I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's it for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.